She stood at my door in just a towel, water dripping everywhere. "Can you help fix my shower?" "Hello, I'm Daniel. I'm 42, an architect who moved into this duplex 3 months after my divorce. I'd gotten good at keeping to myself, working late, on building designs while the world slept. My neighbor's wife was someone I'd only noticed from a distance tending her garden while her husband loaded suitcases into taxis. But that Tuesday night, Rebecca knocked, and there she was, vulnerable and dripping, asking for help. I grabbed my toolbox, keeping my eyes on hers. "Show me the problem." The way she said thank you told me this was about more than plumbing. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. The divorce papers had been final for 3 months, but I'd settled into my new routine long before that. The duplex wasn't much, a compact two-bedroom with weathered siding and creaky floors, but it gave me the space I needed to rebuild. Most importantly, it gave me quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts, even if those thoughts aren't always the best company. I'd turned the second bedroom into my home office, though office might be too formal a word for what it had become. Drafting table pushed against the window, reference books stacked in precarious towers, and sketches pinned to every available wall surface. This was where I spent my nights, losing myself in architectural designs and client proposals until the sky started to lighten. You might think working until 3 or 4 in the morning sounds lonely. Maybe it was, but there was something satisfying about those hours, when the rest of the world fell away and it was just me, my pencils, and the clean possibilities of a fresh sheet of drafting paper. No disappointed sighs, no passive-aggressive comments about normal work hours. Just the scratch of graphite and the occasional hum of my desk lamp. I hadn't exactly gone out of my way to make connections in the neighborhood. The elderly couple 2 doors down had tried to invite me over for dinner once, but I'd managed to dodge that with a polite excuse about deadlines. The truth was, I wasn't ready for the well-meaning questions, the sympathetic head tilts, the inevitable suggestions about their single niece who would be just perfect for me. The couple next door, though they were harder to avoid noticing, not that they ever bothered me. They just existed in my peripheral vision, like living wallpaper glimpsed through windows and over the shared fence. The husband was always rushing somewhere, rolling expensive luggage to waiting taxis at odd hours. He had that polished look of someone who spent more time in airport lounges than his own living room. The wife, I'd see her in their backyard sometimes, tending to her garden in the slanted afternoon light. She moved with this kind of quiet grace, like she was completely at peace in her own world. They seemed perfect from a distance. The successful businessman and his beautiful wife in their immaculate half of the duplex. I never spoke to either of them, and that felt right somehow. Speaking would have made them real people instead of the abstract concepts they'd become in my mind. Symbols of a normal life I wasn't quite ready to rejoin. That Tuesday evening started like any other. I was deep in modifications for the Harrison Commercial Center, trying to solve the puzzle of how to add more natural light without compromising the structural integrity of the 3rd floor. The pencil moved almost on its own as I lost myself in the problem, adding lines and erasing them in an endless dance of possibility and compromise. The knock, when it came, was sharp enough to make my pencil skid across the page. I sat there for a moment, staring at the jagged line that had just ruined 2 hours of careful work. Another knock, more insistent this time. I glanced at my phone, 9:47 in the evening. Too late for packages, too early for emergencies. Set my pencil down with probably more force than necessary. Annoyed at the interruption and already mentally scrolling through what deliveries I might have forgotten to track, the floor creaked under my feet as I made my way to the front door. Each step, a reminder of how rarely I actually used this part of the house. When I opened the door, all my carefully maintained distance from the neighbors evaporated in an instant. Rebecca Thornfield stood there, dripping wet and wrapped in nothing but a white bath towel. Water trickled from her auburn hair onto my welcome mat, forming dark circles on the fabric. "I'm so sorry," she said, clutching the towel tighter. "My shower, just, ... There's water everywhere, and I didn't know who else to. Her voice cracked slightly, panic bleeding through her embarrassment. I'd never heard her speak before. Her voice was lower than I'd imagined, with a slight husk that suggested either anxiety or the late hour. Water continued to drip steadily from her hair, and I noticed she was shivering slightly in the evening air. Flooding? I managed to ask, trying to keep my eyes firmly on her face. She nodded quickly. The shower just stopped working mid-use, and now water's spreading across the bathroom floor. James left for Singapore this morning. He'll be gone 2 weeks. And she trailed off, shifting uncomfortably on my doorstep. Let me grab my tools, I said, already turning toward the garage. Go back inside before you freeze. My toolbox was right where I'd left it after fixing my own leaky faucet last week. As I followed her next door, I tried to process this surreal turn of events. 3 months of carefully maintained distance, shattered by a plumbing emergency and a towel. The inside of their duplex was a mirror image of mine, but warmer somehow. Family photos lined the walls, and a half-empty wine glass sat on the coffee table beside a dog-eared paperback. The bathroom door stood open, and I could hear the steady splash of water hitting tile. It's through here, she said unnecessarily, leading me to what was indeed a flooding bathroom. Water pooled across the marble floor, seeping into the bath mat, and threatening to escape into the hallway. The shower was still running, spraying water at an odd angle from the wall-mounted head. I set down my toolbox and moved quickly to the access panel behind the shower. I'm going to shut off the water main first, I explained, more to fill the awkward silence than anything else. The valve was stiff, but it turned with a protesting squeak. The shower's spray reduced to a dribble, then stopped completely. In the sudden quiet, I could hear water dripping from various surfaces and Rebecca's slightly uneven breathing. She had perched herself on the bathroom counter, still holding that towel-like armor. I'm so sorry about this, she said again, pushing wet hair back from her face. This is mortifying. I should know how to handle these things by now. It's just, this is the 3rd time he's been away this month, and it feels like something always goes wrong when he's gone. I focused intently on removing the shower handle, pretending not to notice the way her voice wavered on those last words. The valve assembly looked fairly standard, probably mineral buildup causing the issue. How often is he traveling? I asked, keeping my tone casual as I examined the cartridge. Too often, she answered softly. Sometimes I feel like I'm taking care of this house more than he is. She paused, then added quickly, I shouldn't complain. The trips are important for his career. I nodded, not trusting myself to comment. Instead, I concentrated on the task at hand, hyper-aware of this strange intimacy, me in my work clothes, her in nothing but a towel, both of us pretending this was a normal way to meet a neighbor for the first time. The mineral buildup in the valve was worse than I'd expected, but nothing I couldn't handle. As I worked, Rebecca's initial tension began to ease, her posture softening on the counter, despite still being wrapped in that towel. I feel like such an idiot, she said, watching me clean the cartridge. I should know how to deal with these things by now. Most people don't, I assured her, carefully reassembling the valve. How long have you lived here? 12 years. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Married James right after college when I was 22. Moved in here while he was starting his career. She paused, then added quietly, I'm 34 now, and sometimes I feel more like a house sitter than a homeowner. That caught me off guard. I'd assumed she was closer to my age, 42. 8 years suddenly felt like both too much and not enough of a gap. James treats it like a hotel, she continued, her voice taking on a thoughtful tone. Drops in, between flights to Singapore, Hong Kong, wherever the deals are happening that month. Sometimes I wonder if he even notices the changes I make while he's gone. I focused on reattaching the shower handle, giving her the space to talk. There was something magnetic about her honesty, the way she'd dropped her guard, despite the absurdity of our situation. Try it now, I said, stepping back from the repaired shower. She reached over and turned the handle. Water flowed smoothly, Temperature perfect. No spraying or flooding. Relief washed over her face. Thank God, she breathed. You're a lifesaver. We spent the next 15 minutes mopping up water, working in comfortable silence. When the bathroom was finally dry, Rebecca straightened up and met my eyes with sudden determination. Let me make you dinner, she said. As a thank you. I was about to cook anyway, and it's the least I can do after disrupting your evening. You don't have to, I started, but she shook her head. Please, I'd like to. She glanced down at her towel and smiled. Just let me change first. Give me 5 minutes. I should have politely declined. Should have retreated back to my side of the wall, back to my architectural drawings and carefully maintained solitude. Instead, I heard myself say, okay. She disappeared into what I assumed was the master bedroom, and I found myself standing awkwardly in her living room, taking in the details I'd missed earlier. Watercolor paintings hung on the walls alongside the family photos. Art books were stacked on the coffee table. Everything spoke of someone trying to make a home in a space that kept emptying out. Rebecca returned, wearing jeans and an oversized cream sweater that slipped off one shoulder, her damp hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked more like herself somehow, more settled in her skin. I hope pasta is okay, she said, leading the way to the kitchen. I make a pretty decent arrabbiata sauce. She moved through the space with practiced ease, pulling out ingredients. And a well-worn cutting board. Can I help? I offered, but she was already waving me toward a stool at the counter. You've done enough helping for one night. She reached for a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. Though I wouldn't mind some company while I cook. Tell me about what you do. I see you working late through your window sometimes. Architecture. Right. The wine was good, rich and warming. As she began chopping garlic and tomatoes, I found myself talking about my current project. The commercial building renovation I'd been sketching when she knocked on my door. She asked intelligent questions between stirs of the sauce, and I realized this was the longest conversation I'd had with anyone in months. The pasta was perfectly al dente. The sauce spicy enough to warrant regular sips of wine. We'd settled into a comfortable rhythm of conversation when Rebecca glanced toward my house through her kitchen window. I hope this doesn't sound strange, she said, twirling pasta around her fork. But I've seen you working in your office most nights. The light's always on until 2 or 3 in the morning sometimes. I felt my cheeks warm, and not just from the wine. I didn't realize I was that visible. Oh God, I'm making it worse, aren't I? She laughed, covering her face with one hand. I promise I'm not stalking you. It's just, ... You look so focused. Like nothing else exists except what you're creating. I watch sometimes when I'm up late making tea, and she hesitated, then continued more quietly. I envy that. Having something that consumes you like that. The vulnerability in her voice made me set down my fork. What would consume you if you could choose? Art. The word came out like a confession. I was 3 years into my fine arts degree when I met James. Watercolors, mainly, but you don't build a life on watercolors, right? She gave a small shrug that tried to dismiss 12 years of compromise. At least, that's what everyone said. So I switched to business, got married, and here we are. I found myself sharing more than I'd planned to. I throw myself into work because it's easier than processing the divorce, I admitted. The projects give me problems I can actually solve, unlike everything else. How long has it been? The papers were finalized 3 months ago. 15 years of marriage wrapped up in a manila envelope. Rebecca topped off both our wine glasses. Tell me about what you're working on now, the project I interrupted tonight. The renovation downtown. I blinked in surprise. You know about that? Like I said, I've been watching you work. She smiled over her wine glass. You pin up drawings on that board behind your desk. The building has this beautiful curved facade. For the next hour, I found myself explaining the challenges of modernizing the historic structure while preserving its character. Rebecca asked thoughtful questions about sightlines and natural light, revealing an artist's eye for composition. That made me see my own work differently. The wine bottle was empty by the time we finished, our plates long cleared. A comfortable silence settled between us, filled with the kind of understanding that usually takes years to build. I knew I should leave before this feeling grew any deeper roots. I should get back to those drawings, I said, standing slowly. Rebecca nodded, walking me to her door. Thank you again for the rescue. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been home. Any time, I said, and meant it more than I should have. She reached for my toolbox at the same time I did, our fingers brushing against the worn handle. The contact was brief, barely a second of skin against skin, but it sent an electric current through my entire body. We both froze, caught in the sudden charge between us. Rebecca pulled back first, stepping away as if the space between us needed to be measured in more than inches. Good night, she whispered, but her eyes held mine, acknowledging what had just sparked between us, this thing we couldn't name, but couldn't deny. Then she closed the door softly, leaving me standing in her hallway with my toolbox and the lingering warmth of her touch. I tried not to read too much into the gentle knock at my door on Wednesday afternoon. Rebecca stood there with an apologetic smile, gesturing toward her home office window that just wouldn't close properly. The frame needed minor adjustments, 15 minutes of work at most. But our conversation stretched well past an hour as she described her tentative research into local art classes. I feel silly even considering it, she admitted, perched on her desk while I tightened the last screw, like I'm trying to recapture something I should have outgrown. Art isn't something you outgrow, I said, testing the window's smooth operation. It's part of who you are. Thursday brought another knock, this time about a flickering kitchen light that made her feel like she was living in a horror movie. As I replaced the faulty switch, she told me about the watercolor series she'd been working on before dropping out of art school. Urban landscapes dissolving into abstract color studies, the way cities blur in rain. I haven't touched a brush in years, she said softly, but lately, I can't stop thinking about it. Later that same evening, she appeared with her laptop, claiming it had frozen while researching art programs at the local community college. The fix was simple, a basic system restart, but I found myself lingering, helping her bookmark courses that fit around her schedule. The way her eyes lit up, discussing color theory and composition techniques, made me wonder how anyone could have convinced her to give it up. I knew these were excuses. The window, the light, the laptop. None of them truly required immediate attention, but I found myself looking forward to each knock, each small problem that let us share another snippet of conversation. Rebecca was slowly revealing herself in these moments, her quiet rebellion against the perfect life she was supposed to want, her growing determination to reclaim some part of herself. Friday stretched long and empty. I caught myself checking the front door, more often than I'd like to admit, disappointed each time the hallway remained quiet. By evening, I'd resigned myself to focusing on work, trying to ignore how much I'd come to anticipate her visits. The storm hit just after 8 o'clock, a sudden summer squall that darkened the sky to pitch black. Thunder rattled my windows, and the power flickered once, twice, then died completely. I was fumbling for my phone's flashlight when the expected knock came. Rebecca stood in my doorway, illuminated by candlelight that caught the auburn highlights in her hair. She held a bottle of whiskey in one hand and several more candles in the other. I thought maybe we could wait it out together, she said, her voice almost lost in another rumble of thunder. Seemed silly to sit alone in the dark. The rational part of me knew I should make an excuse. Our daily interactions had already crossed lines we couldn't acknowledge. Sharing darkness and whiskey would only blur them further, but I found myself stepping aside to let her in, watching as she moved through my space with familiar ease, setting up candles on the coffee table. I brought glasses too, she said, pulling them from the pocket of her oversized sweater. I came prepared this time. The storm raged outside while we settled onto opposite ends of my couch, the candlelight creating a warm bubble of intimacy around us. Rebecca poured 2 fingers of whiskey into each glass, and I wondered if she could hear my heart beating over the rain. I led Rebecca into my living room, watching as she carefully arranged candles across the coffee table and bookshelf. Each flame cast dancing shadows on the walls, transforming my sparse apartment into something almost magical. The storm drummed steadily against the windows, creating a cocoon of sound that made the rest of the world feel very far away. "I hope you don't mind," she said, settling onto one end of my couch. "I just couldn't face another evening alone with my thoughts." "I know that feeling," I admitted, taking the opposite end. The whiskey glowed amber in our glasses, catching the candlelight dot. Rebecca took a slow sip, then traced her finger around the rim of her glass. "Do you ever feel like you've become invisible? Not to others, necessarily, but to the one person who's supposed to see you most clearly." I watched her profile in the flickering light, struck by how different she looked from the perfectly composed neighbor I'd observed from afar all these months. Here, in the storm-dark intimacy of my living room, she seemed both more vulnerable and more real. "James hasn't really looked at me in years," she continued softly. "Not the real me, anyway. He sees the convenient wife who keeps his house in order between business trips, the society-appropriate partner for corporate events. But I don't think he remembers the art student he fell in love with anymore." Thunder cracked overhead, making us both jump. Rebecca shifted slightly closer on the couch, drawing her knees up to her chest. "I've been researching art programs," she confessed. "Real ones, not just community college courses. There's a master's program that focuses on urban landscape interpretation, exactly what I was passionate about before I dropped out. Sometimes I lie awake imagining just ... going, taking a train somewhere new, renting a tiny studio, making art that matters to no one but me." "What's stopping you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The same thing that had kept me in my own failing marriage far too long, the comfort of familiar pain over uncertain happiness. "Fear, mostly," she replied. "Fear of starting over at 34. Fear of admitting I've wasted 12 years becoming someone I don't recognize. I found myself sharing things I hadn't voiced aloud before. How I'd buried myself in blueprints and client meetings while my marriage crumbled. How I'd convinced myself that professional success could fill the growing void of personal connection. How loneliness had become such a constant companion that I'd stopped questioning its presence." Another thunderclap rattled the windows, and Rebecca moved closer still, until barely a foot of space remained between us. The vanilla scent of her shampoo mingled with the whiskey's warm oak notes. Candlelight caught in her eyes as she turned to face me, transforming their green into liquid gold. "I want to feel alive again," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Not just going through the motions, but really living." "You know what I mean." I did know with an intensity that made my chest ache. In the soft glow of candlelight, watching the play of shadow across her face, I felt more awake than I had in years. The storm's intensity ebbed slightly, leaving us in a cocoon of candlelight and whispered confessions. Rebecca shifted on the couch, turning to face me fully. The amber glow caught the subtle movements of her expression as her eyes met mine. Holding a question I'd been simultaneously dreading and hoping to see since that first night she appeared at my door in nothing but a towel, my heart thundered louder than the rain against the windows. I reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if I'd misread everything. When my hand found her cheek, her skin was warm beneath my palm. My thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, feeling her lean into the touch. "Are you sure about this?" I asked softly, needing to hear it spoken aloud. "Once we cross this line, ... I've never been more sure of anything," she whispered, her breath warm against my wrist. She covered my hand with hers, holding it in place. "I should tell you something. First though." I waited, watching the candlelight dance across her features. "My marriage has been over for a long time, in all the ways that matter, just not on paper." She took a deep breath. "Marcus has someone in Hong Kong, has for years. We're both just comfortable with the arrangement, too comfortable to actually end it." The confession hung in the air between us. I drew back slightly, not removing my hand, but needing her to see my face clearly. "Rebecca, I need you to know, I don't want to be anyone's secret or revenge. The words felt thick in my throat, but I pushed them out anyway. I've been the convenient distraction before. I can't do that again. That's not what this is, she said, her fingers tightening on mine. I don't want that, either. I want something real. Her voice dropped lower. Even if it's just for tonight, I want it to be real. The honesty in her eyes pulled at something deep in my chest. I leaned forward slowly, giving her time to change her mind. She met me halfway, and when our lips finally touched, it was soft, testing, careful, like the first step onto uncertain ground. But then she made a small sound in the back of her throat, and the careful exploration shattered. Weeks of tension broke in an instant. My hands found her waist as she pressed closer, deepening the kiss. Her fingers threaded through my hair, and I could taste whiskey and want on her tongue. Every point of contact felt electric, charged with all the things we'd left unspoken during our careful dance of the past few days. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. Rebecca's lips were slightly swollen. Her hair must where I'd run my fingers through it. We sat there in the flickering candlelight, foreheads nearly touching, both understanding that we'd just chosen something that would fundamentally change everything. The storm still raged outside, but in here, in this pocket of warmth and shadow we'd created, there was only the sound of our gradually steadying breaths and the weight of the choice we'd just made. Rebecca's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing gently, and I squeezed back, anchoring us both in this moment of no return. Our hands stayed linked in the darkness as silence settled between us. The candles had burned lower, casting longer shadows across my living room walls. I traced my thumb across her knuckles, gathering courage to ask what I needed to know. "Tell me about Marcus," I said quietly. "About the reality of it." Rebecca's fingers tightened slightly in mine. "We keep up appearances for his family's sake. They're old money, very traditional, and honestly, the arrangement works for both of us financially." She gave a soft, bitter laugh. "He has his life in Hong Kong. I have the house, my garden. We're excellent roommates when he's here, which is rarely." "And you're okay with that?" I asked, watching her profile in the flickering light. I was. For a long time. She turned to face me fully, until I wasn't anymore. I swallowed hard, voicing my deepest fear. "I don't want to be a mistake, Rebecca. Something you'll regret when morning comes. Is that what you think this is?" Her free hand came up to cup my cheek. "This isn't impulse or loneliness talking. I've been watching you work late into the night, seeing someone who chose solitude instead of settling for emptiness. It drew me to you. The shower that night, double quotes, I started, was actually broken." She smiled. "But it wasn't the only reason I knocked on your door. I needed to know if what I felt watching you was real." The power suddenly hummed back to life, fluorescent brightness flooding the room for 3 seconds before plunging us back into darkness. We both laughed at the timing, the tension breaking slightly. In the renewed darkness, Rebecca stood, her hands still holding mine. Without words, she gently tugged, making her intention clear. This wasn't just a moment born of storm and whiskey. It was a beginning. Rebecca led me through my own home, each step deliberate and grounded. The candlelight we carried made shadows dance on the walls, our feet silent against the hardwood floors. I followed, aware of every breath, every choice that had brought us to this moment. You know those turning points in life where you can feel the world shifting? This was one of them. Not rushed or desperate, but calm and certain, like watching dawn break after a long night. When we reached my bedroom door, Rebecca paused, turning to face me. The candle in her hand cast a warm glow across her features, highlighting the quiet determination in her eyes. "I want you to know," she said softly, "that I'm here because I choose to be." I set my candle on the dresser, its light joining hers. I know, the storm rattled the windows, but in here, time seemed to move differently. "What do you want from tonight?" She placed her candle beside mine, considering the question. "Presence," she finally answered. "Just, being fully here, with someone who actually sees me." Her hand found mine in the dim light. I know I have decisions to make about my marriage soon, but right now, I need this moment to be separate from all that. I understand, and I did. After months of carefully maintained solitude, of keeping everyone at arm's length, I was tired. Tired of safe loneliness, of controlled distances. I've been hiding behind my work, telling myself it was enough. Rebecca stepped closer, her free hand coming to rest against my chest. It's never enough, is it? Just existing, going through the motions. The vulnerability in her voice matched what I felt. Tonight, I don't want to think about tomorrow or next week. I just want to be here, with you. No promises, I asked, needing to be sure. No promises, she agreed. Just honesty. Just this. The storm outside grew louder, rain drumming against the windows, but it felt distant, like it belonged to another world entirely. In here, we'd created our own quiet space, separate from our regular lives and all their complications. Rebecca's hand moved from my chest to my face, thumb tracing along my jaw. The touch was exploratory, gentle. Nothing like the frantic passion you'd expect from an affair. This was something else entirely, something more honest. Are you sure about this? I whispered, even though I knew the answer. Some questions need to be asked out loud, I'm sure. Her eyes held mine steadily. I've never been more certain about crossing a line. Are you? Instead of answering, I leaned down and kissed her. Not like our first kiss on the couch, which had been testing boundaries. This was different, slower, deeper, full of intention. Rebecca responded in kind, her fingers threading through my hair as she pressed closer. When we separated, both slightly breathless, she smiled. Not the polite smile I'd seen her give her husband when loading his suitcases, but something real and a little wild. We're really doing this, aren't we? We are. I brushed a strand of hair from her face. No, going back after tonight. Good, she whispered, and there was freedom in her voice. I don't want to go back, I want to go forward. The candlelight flickered, making shadows dance across her features as she took my hand again. Everything about this moment felt intentional. Two people choosing vulnerability despite knowing the complications it would bring. Two people tired of playing it safe. Outside, thunder cracked close enough to rattle the windows, but in here, we'd created our own world, a space where we could just be present, be real, be seen. Whatever tomorrow brought, we had this moment. And we were choosing it with clear eyes and full hearts. Hours melted away in the darkness, marked only by the storm's gradual surrender to quiet and our whispered conversations between tender moments. We talked about everything and nothing, childhood dreams, failed relationships, the way life has a habit of redirecting our carefully planned paths. Rebecca's laugh was softer in the dark, more genuine than the polite chuckle I'd heard during our earlier encounters. The storm finally settled into a gentle rain, its rhythm lulling us into comfortable silence. I must have drifted off, because when I opened my eyes again, the bed beside me was empty. For one horrible moment, panic seized my chest. Had she regretted everything and slipped away? Then I noticed the light spilling from my home office. Followed it, padding quietly down the hallway. There she was, perched at my drafting table, wearing my white dress shirt from yesterday. The pre-dawn light painted her in soft blues and grays, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. She was bent over my latest project, the mixed-use building I'd been working on when she first knocked on my door. She didn't notice me at first, too absorbed in what she was doing. A pencil moved delicately in her hand, adding something to the margins of my plans. I stepped closer, curious rather than concerned about her alterations to my work. That's when I saw what she was creating. In one of the wide windows I'd designed, she'd sketched a small figure looking out at the world. The detail was remarkable. You could sense the person's posture, their engagement with the view, their presence in the space. I couldn't sleep, Rebecca said without turning round, somehow sensing me there. I hope you don't mind. Your work. It's fascinating. The way you think about space, how people might move through it. She gestured to the plans spread before her. These lines aren't just walls and windows to you, are they? They're possibilities. I moved closer, looking over her shoulder. She'd been busy throughout my technical drawings. She'd added more figures. A couple sharing coffee at a corner table. Someone reading in a window seat. A small group gathered around what would be a fountain in the courtyard. Each tiny addition brought life to my precise geometrical forms. You're showing me what's missing, I said quietly, understanding, dawning. In the drawings, and double quotes, and in life. She turned then, looking up at me with those expressive green eyes. Maybe. I couldn't help noticing, your spaces are beautiful, thoughtfully designed, but sometimes they feel like they're waiting for something, someone. She touched one of her sketched figures lightly. We can create the most perfect structures, the most efficient routines, but without people to fill them, She let the thought trail off. I studied her additions more closely. Each figure was distinct, suggesting a story, a purpose. They weren't just generic human forms, but glimpses of life being lived. You have a gift for this, I told her. Seeing the human element, the stories in spaces. It's the artist in me, she said, with a small smile. I can't help imagining the lives that might unfold in the places you create. She turned back to the drawings, adding another delicate figure to an alcove I'd designed. Sometimes, I think, that's what drew me to watch you working all those nights. You were creating worlds while I was just existing in one. The pre-dawn light strengthened, gradually, painting everything in pearls and silvers. I watched her continue to work, her artist's hand bringing warmth to my cold precision. Each stroke of her pencil was a reminder of what I'd been missing, not just in my designs, but in my carefully constructed solitude. The way she transformed empty spaces into scenes of life and connection spoke to something I'd been avoiding since my divorce. She set down her pencil and looked up at me again. I meant what I said earlier, about my marriage, she said softly. There are decisions ahead, but this moment, she gestured to the drawings, to the growing light, to us. This feels like the first real thing I've done in years. The morning light grew stronger, transforming my usually stark apartment into something softer, more lived in. Rebecca set down the pencil and stretched, my shirt riding up slightly on her thighs. I should probably make us some coffee, she said, natural as breathing. Like she'd done it 100 times before. I followed her to my kitchen, watching as she opened cabinets with surprising accuracy. Second try, she admitted, catching my questioning look. I may have paid attention when you made tea that night after fixing my laptop. The coffee maker hummed to life, and we moved around each other in the small space with an ease that should have felt strange but didn't. She found mugs while I reached past her for filters. Our domestic choreography unexpectedly graceful for two people who'd been strangers just days ago. The neighbors will be up soon, she said quietly, watching the coffee drip. It wasn't quite regret in her voice, but acknowledgement of the world beyond these walls. I should go home before anyone notices I'm not there. I nodded, understanding the practicalities, even as I wished we could stretch this morning longer. Your husband returns in 10 days. Yes. Rebecca wrapped her hands around the mug I'd filled, steam rising between us. I know we need to talk about that, about what happens next. She took a slow sip, considering her words. I meant what I said last night. This WASN, single quotes T.ISN, single quotes T. Just impulse or escape for me. I believe you. I did too. There was too much honesty in how she'd watched me work. In the careful way she'd added life to my drawings, in every conversation we'd shared this week. But I also need to handle things right, she continued. Make decisions about my marriage that aren't just reactions. Does that make sense? It does. I leaned against the counter, giving her space while staying close. I'm not asking for promises, Rebecca. Maybe we could just take it day by day. She smiled then, some tension leaving her shoulders. I'd like that. Setting down her mug. She glanced at my toolbox, still sitting by the door. You know, I should probably learn to fix things properly in my own house. Since I've had such an excellent example of home repair this week, I caught her meaning the subtle way she was suggesting continuation. I could teach you. Basic maintenance at least. Wouldn't want any more shower emergencies. Wouldn't want that, she agreed, and we both smiled at the memory of how this started. Though that particular crisis worked out pretty well, all things considered. The sun was fully up now, neighborhood sounds beginning to filter through the windows. Rebecca gathered her clothes from where they'd been hastily discarded the night before, disappearing briefly to change. When she returned, she looked exactly like the proper neighbor she'd been days ago, except for the knowing warmth in her eyes. At my back door, hidden from the street's view, she paused. "I'll knock again soon," she said softly, rising on her toes to kiss me. It was different from last night's desperate passion. This was slow, deliberate, a promise of more to come. Watched through the window as she crossed the yard to her house. Moving casually, as if she'd just borrowed sugar or dropped off mail. Only when her door closed behind her did I return to my drafting table, where her additions to my plans remained. The small figures she'd drawn seemed to pulse with life against the clean lines of my designs. Each one a reminder that empty spaces could be filled. That isolation was a choice I no longer had to make. Those tiny sketched people would stay in my final drawings, I decided. They belonged there, just as Rebecca's unexpected presence belonged in my carefully ordered world, bringing warmth to places I hadn't even realized were cold. I sat at my drafting table as morning stretched into afternoon. Unable to focus on the clean geometric lines I usually found so satisfying, my eyes kept drifting to Rebecca's additions, those small, simple figures she'd sketched into the margins and windows of my designs. They changed everything about how I saw the spaces I created. Taking a fresh sheet of paper, I began redrawing the office building that had consumed my evenings before that first knock on my door. But this time, I saw it differently. Instead of maximizing efficiency, I found myself considering the human elements I'd always treated as afterthoughts. The stark lobby softened into a welcoming space with built-in benches near tall windows. I adjusted the angle of the eastern facade, imagining morning light warming the reception area where people would start their days. The sterile break room transformed into a gathering space with comfortable corners for conversation. You know those moments when you realize you've been doing something wrong for years? This was mine. I'd been designing buildings as if they were elaborate sculptures, all form and function, forgetting they needed to house actual lives. Around 6 o'clock, a gentle knock pulled me from my revisions. Rebecca stood at my door holding a canvas grocery bag, no pretense of broken appliances or technical emergencies this time. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, stepping inside like she belonged there. Maybe she did. We moved to my kitchen, and I watched her unpack ingredients with familiar ease. "I noticed you weren't in your office all day," she admitted, setting a pot of water to boil. "I worried maybe you were having regrets." "No regrets," I assured her, reaching past to grab wine glasses. "Just ... reconsidering some things about my work." "Your additions to my plans got me thinking." She smiled, chopping vegetables with practiced motions. "The little people, they weren't meant to be criticism. I just kept imagining stories for the spaces you create, who might live there, what moments they might share. They made me realize I've been designing empty stages instead of homes for those stories," I said, opening the wine. "I spent so long focusing on perfect lines that I forgot about the messy, beautiful life that happens between them." We fell into an easy rhythm, preparing dinner together, talking about our days as if we'd done this countless times before. The pasta was simple but perfect, and we ate at my small table while evening settled around us. Neither of us mentioned her husband's impending return, or what these quiet dinners might mean. We were living in the spaces between carefully drawn lines, and for now, that was enough. Later, looking over my revised plans together, Rebecca traced the new additions with gentle fingers. "You've added so many gathering places," she observed. "Little nooks where people might actually connect. I had a recent lesson in how unexpected connections can change everything." I said, thinking of that first night with her shower crisis. Sometimes, life floods in, whether you're ready or not. She leaned against me, understanding the reference. And sometimes a broken shower is exactly what you need. Sometimes, I agreed, watching as she picked up a pencil and began adding more tiny figures to my newest designs. These weren't just silhouettes, they were people living moments. A couple sharing coffee by a window. Friends laughing on one of my newly added benches, a solitary figure finding peace in a quiet corner. Looking at her drawings spreading across my precise architectural plans, I understood something fundamental had shifted in more than just my design philosophy. Like these buildings, transforming under our combined vision, I was becoming someone who left room for the unexpected, who designed space in his life for connection rather than controlled isolation. The best structures I was learning weren't the ones that fought against human nature, but those that welcomed it, that created opportunities for life to flourish in surprising ways. Rebecca had shown me that, one small drawn figure at a time. If tonight's ending felt right, hit subscribe, and share this with one person who needs a gentle story. I'll be here tomorrow with another